No matter where we live, no matter what our circumstances, no matter how much money or worldly success we may have, we all experience evil. And there are many people throughout history who have considered the existence of evil, the amount of evil, and the nature of evil as evidence that there is no God, especially not one who has the will and power to do anything about it. But although it seems we all recognize evil when we see it in things like the Holocaust, murder, a tsunami, or cancer, what exactly is evil? Augustine defined evil as a privation of good. In other words, evil is where good should be, but isn't. This definition also specifies that evil is not a thing. It has no substance. This doesn't imply that evil does not exist. Rather, it means that evil exists in the same way as dark or cold does. Dark and cold are very real things that are ways of speaking of the absence of light or heat. Both dark and cold are parasites in a way of light and heat, since light and heat can exist without dark and cold, but dark and cold cannot exist without the existence of light and heat. The importance of this way of thinking about evil is that although evil is real, it was not created by God, but it was made possible by God. Although God is not directly responsible for creating evil, He is sovereign over it and uses it to accomplish His good purposes. This idea of God and evil coexisting is extremely difficult to reconcile at times, even for the staunchest believer. And this is precisely the rub that is so often exploited to show that God does not exist. There are two kinds of arguments against God that use the existence of evil. One argument holds that evil could not exist at the same time as a morally perfect, all-powerful, all-knowing God. This is called the logical argument from evil. The other kind of argument says the amount and quality of evil makes it extremely unlikely that a morally perfect, all-powerful, all-knowing God exists. This is known as the evidential or probabilistic argument. There are two kinds of answers to this question. One is called a theodicy and tries to show God's reasons for allowing evil. This is a difficult task given the lack of information on the subject in the Bible. Although the Bible has a lot of material dealing with the nature of evil and its remedy, it doesn't explicitly reveal why God allows it. A more modest approach is to justify God by giving plausible reasons for evil. This way of arguing is known as a defense. The advantage of a defense is that it can show the bankruptcy of a challenge without the burden of giving specific reasons why God permits evil. Throughout history, the most common objection to the belief in God has been the inability to reconcile the existence of evil with a perfectly good, all-powerful, all-knowing, loving God. The argument looks like this. If God is all-powerful, He could prevent evil. If God is all-knowing, He would know when evil was about to take place and could stop it. If God is loving and morally perfect, He would want to prevent evil. Evil exists. Therefore, God does not exist. In the logical argument from evil, one of two things must be mistaken. Either there's no God or there's no evil. Some people have tried to solve the problem by denying the existence of evil, but this response is clearly inadequate. It's extremely difficult to imagine a person who knows about and could prevent the Holocaust or rape or murder, but instead does nothing because they don't believe in the reality of evil. For people who care about truth, evil is undeniable and cannot be resolved by just defining it out of existence. Those who deny the existence of evil still get cancer, are raped, murdered, and suffer in natural disasters. They may call it something else or try to ignore it, but they still experience evil. When we consider the arguments for God's existence, such as the cosmological, design, and moral arguments, and the arguments for the resurrection and the trustworthiness of the Bible, we see we have excellent reasons for believing that God exists. The problem that the logical argument from evil tries to exploit is how the existence of evil and the existence of God are compatible. Is it inconsistent to believe both exist? This question was famously answered by philosopher Alvin Plantinga with what he called the free will defense. The idea is that if there is merely a possible reason why God would allow evil, then the existence of God and evil simultaneously is not incompatible or inconsistent, and the logical argument from evil fails. Simply stated, the free will defense suggests the possibility that an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-benevolent God created human beings as free moral agents with the ability to choose evil as well as good. Because God is all-knowing, He knew evil would result. Because He is all-powerful, He could have created the world in some other way. And because He is all-benevolent and morally perfect, He could only have good reasons for making the world in this way. As a result, God may have created the potential for evil, but human beings, because they have chosen evil things, made it actual. But this actualizing of evil was not news to God. Thus, ultimately, there is evil in the world because God has a good reason for its existence. According to the Bible, neither humankind nor the world was made in a state corrupted by evil. God created all things and called them very good. God also provided an abundance for everything that Adam and Eve could ever need. As creatures made in God's image, they were endowed with moral ability, the freedom to choose between good, adhering to God's will, and evil, violating God's will. How long this good state lasted is unknown, but at some point Adam and Eve freely disobeyed God by violating God's one commandment. As a result, evil was introduced into the world by the free choice of morally accountable creatures. God made evil possible, but people made evil actual. Of course, if God is omniscient, then He knew all along that people would sometimes choose evil. But if God is morally perfect and benevolent, then He must have had a good reason for permitting evil. And this is all we need to know. The specific reasons God allows evil are not given, nor are they required in order for Christianity to be logically consistent. The whole point of the free will defense is to show that God and evil are not incompatible. It does not claim that this is the actual scenario. Whether it's true or not is irrelevant. The important thing is that there is a way of affirming both the existence of God and evil without being inconsistent. Another way of using evil to argue against the existence of God is to take the enormous amount of evil and the egregiousness of evil and weigh it against the claim that God exists. Simply put, which do we see more of, evil or evidence of God? Unlike the logical argument from evil, which is a compatibility argument, this argument is based on probability. The evidential or probabilistic argument from evil does not come right out and say that God does not exist. But it does say that it is very likely or even probable that God does not exist. And that is justification enough not to believe in God. This form of the argument has been articulated many different ways. One well-known example uses a hypothetical situation of a fawn who dies a slow, painful death in a forest fire started by lightning. More often, real-world examples are used, such as the beating, rape, and murder of a 5-year-old girl. The point of these examples is that there is no point. What possible good could come of these things that could justify such evil? Some people who use the evidential argument don't deny that some amount of evil might be necessary for God to achieve His purpose. However, they believe that there is more evil than necessary for God's plan to succeed. But how could anyone know such a thing? Just because a resulting good isn't perceived by someone does not mean there is no resulting good. To know all the effects and consequences of a situation would require omniscience. The only person who could know whether the good resulting from evil is justified is God Himself. There's just no way for us to know how much evil is required to bring about a perceived good.